Hi, I'm Donna Butler, Director of Community Services for Volusia County. I'd like to welcome you to the 5th and final webinar of our Affordable Housing webinar series. In the prior webinars, we heard from the Florida Chamber regarding how they are working to address affordable housing as part of their Florida 2030 blueprint. We also heard from panelists who identified methods of funding affordable housing and those engaged in preserving and increasing our existing stock of affordable housing. Last week, we heard from a local municipality, a land use attorney, and a developer regarding the barriers and facilitators of affordable housing development. Today, we will wrap up this first part of our affordable housing initiative, but it's not too late for interested parties to participate. If you've missed any of our previous sessions, all prior webinars are available on the Volusia County webpage, www.volusia.org, and this webinar will be posted as well. We cannot stress enough how important it is for our stakeholders to join us on Friday, August 27th at the Ocean Center for our Affordable Housing Summit. You can register for the summit at the county's website, and we look forward to seeing you all there to continue this process. Today, our panelists are here to give us success stories from the field and tell us a bit about how they got there. Our panel consists of experts from throughout the state of Florida that can provide the city and county government perspective, as well as a view from an affordable housing developer. This group has worked through each stage that we have discussed, including creating housing and revising policies. They're here to tell us about the progress they've made. All attendees are muted and have video disabled to ensure the speakers can be seen and heard. After hearing from all speakers, we'll have a question and answer period. Please submit your relevant questions for the panelists in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen throughout the presentations, and we'll have the panelists answer as many as we can during the question and answer session. We encourage you to participate by asking questions during today's webinar. Once again, thank you for taking the time to join us today. We appreciate your support during this process. Our first panelist is Whit Blanton. Whit has more than 30 years of professional planning experience and is the executive director of Pinellas, an independent public agency responsible for countywide and regional planning, integrating use and transportation plans, and setting priorities for state and federal transportation funding. Thank you, Whit, for joining us today. We look forward to your presentation and hearing more about Pinellas.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'm delighted. I am an Ormond Beach former resident. I grew up in Ormond Beach, so it's great to be back virtually in Volusia County, a place that I really hold dear. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our experience in Pinellas County, connecting our community, how we have focused on linking housing, jobs, and transportation in our community. But first, I want to talk a little bit about our agency and how we function, because we are a little bit different animal than any other public agency in the state of Florida. We are a combination of a land use planning agency that operates countywide, serving the county, unincorporated areas, and our 24 municipalities in Pinellas County. And we are also the Metropolitan Planning Organization, responsible for transportation funding, prioritization, and all the functions of a traditional Metropolitan Planning Organization. We were formed in 2014 by a special act of the Florida legislature with the mission of guiding integrated land use and transportation solutions in Florida's most densely developed county. And our focus really in Pinellas County has been first on making good land use decisions, guiding growth and redevelopment to the right locations, protecting and enhancing existing communities, and then using our MPO responsibilities to guide transportation investments to support that land use vision. And sometimes other communities have looked at the other way around, and I feel like we've got the right approach by really our vision as our land use. And so that's why housing is so important to the transportation solutions, because housing enables transportation to function in a county like ours. We are part of an urbanized area that includes Tampa, Hillsborough County, and Pasco County, and they have their own MPOs. So we operate in a very complex regional environment that has a lot of regional coordination as well. Our framework for how we do planning in Pinellas County has to be different than our neighboring counties because we are a largely developed county. I refuse to use the words built out because we are redeveloping. A lot of our growth and development happened in the 1960s and 70s, and we do not have any vacant land left for development. So unlike Pasco to the north or Hillsborough or Manatee County, where there's a lot of room for growth and they are growing outward, we are having to grow up, and that is the only way for growth. And with about 100,000 new residents projected by 2045, density is really important. So our Advantage Pinellas strategy is the vision for our county that we adopted in 2019. And it focuses first in that center of the pyramid that you see here, where community, environment, economic opportunity is at the center of everything we do. That's our land use focus. And then around that, we try to craft transportation strategies or solutions, such as improving traffic flow, managing congestion, creating safer streets, and enhancing transit service that support that vision for community. And it's because we have this unique context that we have to think and plan differently. And our focus is really on connecting people to jobs and housing that's affordable. We have one of the highest prices of housing anywhere in the state of Florida. And that's because our supply has really been constrained because of that developed nature and historically an aversion to density in much of our county. And that makes sense in some parts of our county, but it also doesn't make sense as a county-wide policy. And we also focus on really how do we bring people together to commit to shared actions and shared outcomes around those different strategies. And 100,000 people is like adding the city of Clearwater to our population and all the needs and demands that the city of Clearwater has. And that's really hard to fit in a county where you don't have any vacant land. So it creates some real challenges for us. Our housing crisis is real in Pinellas County, and I'm probably understating it with some of the figures on this slide. For instance, in parts of our county, the amount that the average household spends on housing and transportation is as high as almost 70%, depending on where you are in the county. The countywide average is 57%. The median income in Pinellas County for an average house is $54,000, but if you're in St. Petersburg, it's closer to $45,000. If you're in Tarpon Springs, it's a little closer to $47,000. And the median home price is $355,000, but that's seen a 25% increase in just 1 year, and it's been about a 40% increase over about the last 5 years. All that has led us to realize that we need to produce about 1,000 housing units a year or 10,000 over the next decade. And that's in the workforce housing range of 80 to 120% of area median income. We also need to provide affordable housing at lower income levels too. So it presents some real challenges that we've had to get creative to overcome. So I'd like to introduce what we call our countywide housing strategy, which is really a multifaceted approach that integrates policy, regulatory actions, funding, and production to deliver those goals. And we've started with what we're calling a Pinellas County Advantage Pinellas Housing Compact that is a collaborative agreement among our local government partners to develop the resources and tools and policy framework needed to bring everybody aboard and work together on this solution. And one thing I love about being in Pinellas County is that we generally row in the same direction here. We've had some historical differences between North County, Mid County, and South County, but they're pretty minimal compared to places that I've lived and worked throughout Florida, because we are in this unique situation. And I think we've overcome some of the difficulties that we've had historically in political issues. Not that everything's perfect. So this multifaceted approach also includes some things I'm going to talk about shortly: our investment corridor strategy, expanded rehabilitation programs, which I won't get into too much, and then our Penny 4 housing program, which is a dedicated funding source for housing production. So the vision of this housing compact is really to unite the county and the 24 municipalities in a common and coordinated approach so that we can work together to achieve these outcomes. And I think of housing as infrastructure. It is part and parcel of our transportation strategy, because if you think about it, if people are having to live 2 counties away to commute to a good job in Pinellas County, that exacerbates our transportation problem and it doesn't solve our housing problem. And people are doing that. We're the second largest, we have the second largest number of manufacturing jobs in the state of Florida after Miami-Dade. We're not all about tourism, although that contributes a significant amount of our job base as well. So we're attracting both manufacturing workers and hotel and hospitality workers, and they need a place to live in our county. The Housing Compact really focuses on these different strategic areas, connecting housing and employment, the health impacts of housing and health in all policies, the social and economic equity aspects of housing and really targeting those communities in greatest need, the accessibility issues of age and disability and allowing seniors to age in community or age in place, and developing broad support from the public and private sector. We cannot do this only through Habitat for Humanity, for instance. They're an important partner, but we need the private sector to be producing affordable housing in our county. Otherwise, we'll never reach those goals. So the action plan that we have worked in partnership with Pinellas County to develop and our other entitlement communities that receive federal housing and state assistance for housing programs have really been focusing on identifying specific production and preservation targets, that 10,000 over the next decade, for instance, and really importantly, developing a common terminology and definitions. What we found when we embarked on this effort about a year ago is that everybody was defining affordable housing differently, and they thought of it in different terms. And we've been throwing concepts out there like the missing middle and density and things like that, and we haven't adequately defined it so that we have a common set of reference points for people to understand. And then we are working to establish short, mid, and long-term goals and performance measures so that we can track our progress and see how we're working toward getting to those goals. And also, data sharing is huge. We also found in our initial conversations that when somebody asked us, well, how much affordable housing is out there that you're providing? Nobody knew. We really didn't have a good handle on that inventory. And we also had no ability to ensure that the housing that was being built in the right locations. There's a term out there called location efficiency. And if you can locate housing in the right places, it creates a whole range of efficiencies for people so that they might not have to have 2 cars per household. They might be able to walk and bicycle to services. And that reduces some of the burdens and demands on transportation costs, which are part of that equation for affordability. One of the things we also felt we needed was shared messaging. And so we've rallied around the Advantage Pinellas terminology, which we started with our adoption of our long-range transportation plan. And we had to work a little bit to convince the county that Advantage Pinellas was not just a transportation strategy, because we were thinking, as the MPO and the Pinellas Planning Council, or Forward Pinellas, we were thinking of Advantage Pinellas as a housing, an economic, and a transportation strategy, as well as a land use strategy. And once we were able to break down that barrier with Pinellas County, they agreed to embrace that tagline, that logo, and that branding so that everything falls under the Advantage Pinellas framework. And I like to say our advantages include the fact that we have 24 municipalities, because they bring a rich character and a unique set of needs to the discussion. And that makes us a pretty diverse county in my mind. So we've created a shared web presence, a landing page with a website, a social media outreach strategy, using different communication tools to convey the needs and the issues. And right now we're really just talking about what the challenges are and talking up the need for this compact, because it hasn't yet been adopted by all the local governments. Our agency was the first one to adopt it. Pinellas County will adopt it this summer. The city of Clearwater, the city of St. Pete, and the city of Largo will be next in line, and the city of Pinellas Park after that. We have an ongoing education program as well, just talking about the tools and the strategies and the options for people. For instance, one of the things that we produced was what we call a knowledge exchange series about missing middle housing, defining it, showing what it looks like, and the concept of gentle density. that if you're in a suburban area or single family neighborhood area with some commercial adjacent, gentle density means around that commercial, and as you're entering into that single family neighborhood, you might see duplexes, you might see triplexes, you might see garden apartments, things that don't look too intense and fit within the character of the community, but offer a range of different affordability types, for instance, for grandma or for some of your workforce members. Another key component is what we're calling our investment corridor framework. And this really started with our long-range transportation plan. And the map here I'm showing on the screen looks like a transportation strategy, but it's really not. These are corridors, they're transportation corridors. But I mentioned our challenge about where we grow and how we grow. These are commercial corridors with a lot of retail. We have way more retail than we need. And if you've been following trends over the last 15 to 20 years, you know that bricks and mortar retail have struggled and they've been affected by Amazon and other companies on the internet. And so we have a lot more retail space than we need, a lot more commercial space, and we have a lot more parking than we need, surface parking. And so these commercial corridors are largely disturbed areas, and we believe and feel that we have less of a NIMBY, not in my backyard backlash by focusing on redevelopment and housing that's affordable in these investment corridors, rather than a vacant church parcel in a single family neighborhood where we've had tremendous pushback. And so these are the corridors that we evaluated that serve lower income neighborhoods and connect them to our job training centers, such as St. Pete College and Pinellas Technical College. They also connect people to jobs, whether they be hospitality or manufacturing or office. And so Advantage Pinellas is really built on supporting and sustaining better transit service along these investment corridors and in the form of higher frequency premium bus service. We had previously advanced a rail transit strategy in 2014, put that referendum out to voters, and it failed 62 to 37. So we have refocused on a better bus network, which the anti-rail opponents felt was a more appropriate strategy for our county. And frankly, with jobs spread all over Pinellas County, we don't really have a single employment destination like downtown Orlando or downtown Jacksonville. So rail is really a struggle for us in this county, and probably needs to start in Tampa if we're going to have rail in this region. So we focused on express bus service, basically, and high frequency local service. And if we develop housing in these investment corridors, then we think we have found a really sweet spot for housing and transportation to connect people to jobs and people to be part of the economy. And we have about 100,000 residents who either lack a high school education or they are underemployed. And we need to have those people part of the economy for us to be successful, because with housing as expensive as it is, it's really hard to recruit people to Pinellas County to come here and live unless they are already earning a high wage. Another component of this, and this is central to the investment corridor strategy, is what we're calling regulatory reform. And we are beginning to develop a toolkit. This is by no means complete, but this will be one of the first work products from the Housing Compact to give the local governments and the development community flexibility to entice private sector investment. And think of it like this: if every parcel has to provide parking on site, say 2 parking spaces per unit, if they have to provide stormwater and open space at every parcel, what do you think they're going to do? They are not going to develop affordable housing. And so we're taking more of a community approach to those kinds of infrastructure components. And if they're nearby, if they're provided within a quarter-mile or a half-mile walk shed, then the onus is on finding and investing in those spaces and not making every individual parcel responsible. And that's just an example, but I'm going to back up to the investment corridor image here and just highlight for you for a moment that when we look at these corridors, one of the key things that we're thinking about with regulatory reform is starting with one of these corridors to do an investment corridor strategy and really work out the details of that regulatory reform effort. So that's on tap for this fall, and we've budgeted $600,000 to begin that effort. The other issue is speaking with one voice. And again, I mentioned the common definitions, but it's also having this common shared database of a tracking system so that we can report progress, show the locations of affordable housing, and track how well they're aligning with where transit is available, where community services are available. And we've introduced this concept of 20-minute neighborhoods, which isn't new to the planning world, but 20-minute neighborhoods just essentially means that within a 20-minute travel time, whether I'm on foot, on bike, or in a car, I can meet 90% or so of my daily transportation needs. And if we set up those around where the mobility hubs are with these investment corridors, then I think we've got a good framework for housing that's affordable with transportation options. And so we will be producing this regulatory toolkit that will incentivize and encourage local governments to take advantage of this. On our part, what we do as the countywide planning agency, because every local government comprehensive plan has to be consistent with our countywide plan, we have raised the density levels in the investment corridors much higher than they used to be, so that we are no longer an impediment to density for the local governments. It's really up to them to take advantage of it. We're not mandating density. In fact, the city of Largo just completed a plan for what they call the Tri-City area along one of our investment corridors. And they needed about half the density that we allowed them to take advantage of. And that was right for them. They didn't want any more. They thought it would produce a backlash, and they think that satisfies their needs. So it's a combination of a little bit of a top-down approach, but really it's got to be consistent with the bottoms-up framework. And this makes it easier for developers to understand where we're coming from, to see how they fit in the big picture, and then it provides a competitive edge for funding through our Penny for Pinellas program. So I want to talk about Penny for a minute, because I don't think I have a slide on that. But that's part of our creative solutions. And what that is, it's a sales tax that the voters approved in 2017. And the county commission voted to allocate about $80 million toward housing that's affordable and transportation, housing that's affordable and economic development. And we can't make buildings go vertical with that money, but what we can do is we can make land available. We can clear the land, we can ready sites. And what they have created is a competitive program for applications for both housing programs and economic development. I won't talk about economic development, but that's an important component of the toolkit, is to have dedicated funding over a 10-year period to make this happen. And that's part of the development incentives. So we're allowing more homes on less land. We are also creating naturally occurring affordable housing through that missing middle component and the 20-minute neighborhood concepts that I mentioned. And then the other wrinkle in this is allowing affordable housing in industrial areas and in commercial areas, which we have historically, for about the last 15 years, had a prohibition against. But there was a little act of preemption by the state legislature a few years ago called House Bill 1339, and I'm going to transition to that. Essentially, what House Bill 1339 said, notwithstanding any local regulation, local governments cannot prohibit affordable housing in industrial, commercial, or retail areas. So that put a big kibosh on one of our tenets of our countywide land use planning efforts. And so we have to embrace that now. So we have to come to the grips with what does that look like. So we've been working with St. Petersburg, and we funded a case study research project where we looked at two cities, Minneapolis and Jacksonville, which both had policies of preserving industrial and employment lands, so that we could provide some guidance to our local governments so that we have a consistent approach. The worst thing in our county is for one local government to do it one way and another local government to do it a different way, because we are Florida's second smallest county, and it really matters. So St. Petersburg has been working from this case study research to develop a draft framework. And they're looking at things like, if you're going to be in an industrial or commercial area, do you have a minimum 5-acre parcel? How close are you to schools and to a transit line with our bus network? Are you close to groceries? Are you near our Pinellas Trail or a city park? These amenities are important. And we don't want housing to undermine viable, productive industrial areas. The worst thing you could do is put housing in the middle of an industrial area where there's no transit service, and there's no other services. And that's not fair to the people moving there, and it's not fair to the industrial properties either. So this is something we're going to be meeting with the planning directors on this case study research in about a month to share the results and work toward a common framework. This is just what St. Petersburg is beginning to look at now. The next piece is equity, and we are undergoing an equity assessment now within our agency, both looking internally and externally at our work products. But this has led to discussion of countywide plan and policy changes, because equity has not historically been a consideration in making land use changes in our countywide plan that are requested by local governments. Also promoting resiliency and health in all policies as part of this. We have a pretty expansive coastal high hazard area in Pinellas County, and we have begun to look at allowing some development in the coastal high hazard area as long as it's mitigated. And that's working with emergency management officials to make that happen. So again, St. Petersburg has been at the forefront of those discussions, because about the coastal high hazard area grew to incorporate about 40% of the city of St. Petersburg. And that presented a challenge for a lot of their employment and housing areas. The last little bit I'll talk about is linking housing, jobs, and transportation. And so again, beginning this fall, we are updating our target employment and industrial land study to revisit some of those policies that prohibited any sort of redevelopment of employment or industrial lands to another use or rezoning. And so we want to provide a little more flexibility in that policy, but we also don't want to lose the advantages that we have with, the great number of manufacturing jobs that we have. And then we'll prioritize housing with good transit access. And then our investment corridor strategic plan will be tied into that, and will begin shortly after that in spring of 2022. So just on the timeline of what's next is this summer, we are completing our compact adoption process and engaging with our partners so that there's broad understanding and education about the strategy. And then we will develop our housing tactics and performance goals and measures beginning in 2022. And all this, I think, sets us up for a continued ability to pivot and dialogue and build on the progress that we're making. And getting that commitment from elected officials across the county is really key. So we're starting the compact with those 5 entitlement communities, and then we'll broaden it to the other communities. And I'm not sure we're going to get the buy-in from all of our beach communities. Some of them are very small and very affluent. And I'm not really sure that's where affordable housing should go in the coastal high hazard area, as hurricane prone as we are in the Gulf Coast. But getting people to jobs in the beach communities is part of that strategy as well. So I will stop there. I hope that was informational to you. I thank you for the opportunity to be here today, and look forward to questions later in the presentation.
Thank you, Whit, for sharing this approach to support affordable housing, as well as linking housing, jobs, and transportation. We'll join you again during the question and answer session after our final speaker. Our second panelist is Stephanie Lampe. Stephanie joins us from the city of St. Petersburg, where she is the Senior Housing Development Coordinator. She is responsible for the city's annual home program, the Neighborhood Stabilization Program, and the Workforce Housing Density Bonus Program. Additionally, Stephanie is the staff lead for the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee. As an affordable housing expert that is working with the mayor to implement the For All, From All housing plan, Stephanie is going to walk us through the plan and the city's success.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me and allowing me to be a small part of your affordable housing webinar series. I appreciate you being allowing me to share a little bit about the progress of our plan. And let's see if I can't get my screen sharing to go here. And we have almost a slideshow. Very close. From beginning. Okay, there we go. So I appreciate your patience, and I look forward to sharing a little bit about St. Petersburg's housing plan. The housing plan for the city of St. Petersburg was developed at the end of 2019, and our data points begin at the beginning of 2020, which of course was a little bit of a difficult timing with the pandemic. But it is a 10-year plan, and the title of the plan is Plan for All and From All. And we're hopeful to impact at least 7,000 of our households and improve the lives of at least 19,000 of our neighbors across the city. The For All portion of our plan means that we're focusing on housing not only for those that are the low and moderate income households, which of course is a large portion of our focus for affordable housing, but we're also looking at middle income households, those with incomes at 120% of median income and above, in order to help create a variety of housing choices in our neighborhoods. One of the key components of the low and moderate income portion of the plan is to produce and preserve 2,400 multifamily units. We also are looking forward to supporting the development of at least 200 non-subsidized workforce housing density bonus units using the workforce housing density bonus portion of our land development regulations. We also are looking forward to mixed income developments within the city and on city-owned land. We are focusing also on the construction of 300 is the goal, accessory dwelling units over the 10 years. And we'd like to encourage developers to include those affordable units through granny flats, carriage houses, garage apartment type situations. We also want to enable the purchase of 500 single family homes for households earning at or below 120% of the area median income, and provide single family lots for the construction of new affordable homes. And of course, we would like to assist existing homeowners to remain in their home. One of the most affordable ways to produce affordable housing is to make sure that people can stay when they're already housed. The middle income portion of the program is focused mostly on the neighborhood traditional multifamily zoning district, which Whit mentioned our focus on the missing middle piece of the planning effort. And this is our first step towards implementing the missing middle in St. Petersburg, is the neighborhood traditional multifamily districts. Of course, the accessory dwelling units could also support the middle income households, and mixed income on city-owned land also would be a middle income household strategy. The From All relates to the 60 million that we had anticipated to use towards the production of those 2,400 affordable multifamily units. It's from all because we've all paid a little bit of our taxes towards each of these levels of funding. And the federal and state programs are programs that many of the municipalities are familiar with the home program and the state's State Housing Initiative Partnership Program. Locally, we've tried to produce a funding source that is more flexible and is able to be used in situations where the federal or the state guidelines may not be appropriate, or we would run into difficulty with deadlines with SHIP or certain federal requirements with the home, and having a flexible funding source on hand has been very important in our efforts to produce new units. Part of those local funding sources, city-owned land is being designated for affordable and workforce housing. Whit mentioned the penny for Pinellas. The city of St. Petersburg City Council in 2018 decided that at least $15 million of the penny for Pinellas funding that comes to the city of St. Petersburg will be designated to produce affordable housing. So we're looking forward to that, and that's for the land acquisition portion of project, and we've already received a couple applications for that we're looking forward to bring forward to the council shortly. We do have a community redevelopment area, the South Side CRA, which has budgeted approximately $8.5 million for housing purposes and housing development over the 10-year period. Also, at the end of 2019, we were focused on implementing our Nexus study and reviewing the possibility of a linkage fee and analyzing our payment in lieu of producing a workforce housing density bonus floor area ratio unit. And those were to take almost a 1/3 of the portion of our From All For All plan. When House Bill 1339 was passed last year, in addition to the flexibility for us to be able to consider possible housing in industrial zones and commercial zones, it also unfortunately made it very difficult for the implementation of a linkage fee. And so we placed that effort on hold temporarily until we can determine whether or not this is something that we can continue forward with. So in order to adapt, the mayor recommended and the council approved that the city set aside $5 million in, as an interfund loan program out of our economic stability fund, specifically for affordable housing purposes. Also this week, we have been having listening sessions with the public regarding the anticipated $45 million of American Rescue Plan funding that should be coming to the city of St. Petersburg. We're hopeful that a portion of this funding will be able to offset the loss of the funding from the linkage fee and help us move forward with the From All For All plan. So far in the first 3 listening sessions, it indicates that there has been a strong support from the public for this concept of budgeting a portion of our American Rescue Plan towards affordable housing. To date, our pipeline of multifamily developments that have been approved and are either recently completed or under construction or design and permitting, we have about 401 affordable and workforce units. That's the 2022 date of 2021, about a year and a half, including the pandemic timeframe. And so we feel that we are still on track regarding the production of units under this plan. Obviously, 240 units a year for the 10 years is necessary. And so we are underway with that and very pleased. We're also very proud of the partnerships that we've had with the Pinellas County. And this development is one that the 3rd phase just completed. It's a 24-unit development by one of our community housing development organization partners, Foley Centers. They used the city's home funds for production. They used Pinellas County's Penny for Pinellas land acquisition funding for the land. and they used Pinellas County's SHIP funding for a portion of the construction. We also partnered with Home Depot Foundation to help designate 8 of those units for homeless veterans. And I'm proud to say that recently the National Association of Local Housing Finance Agencies recognized this development, and we're very, very pleased with the location and the look of the development and the partnership that occurred in order to produce these 24 units was really inspirational. Foley Centers is also in the middle of producing 20 units just at the north end of downtown. It is a historic neighborhood, and so the smaller level buildings, instead of a tall tower that you would normally see in the heart of downtown, being on the edge of downtown, these were a little more into the scale of the existing neighborhood. So we're looking forward to the production of these 20 units from Foley Centers as well. And this was also a partnership with Florida Housing Finance Corporation. So the potential projects that we have underway using these various tools that of funding, we're aggressively working towards meeting these goals, aggressively working with multiple developers to try to find ways other than our traditional straight home program or SHIP program developments. We have had some wonderful 9% tax credit developments, but we're hopeful that with this more flexible funding, we'll be able to also use some only city and county funds to develop parcels and get more mixed income development as well, where we can have a combination of market rate with the workforce housing units. One of the developments that is in concept right now provides only 10% of the market rate units, and the remainder are this is I believe a 204 unit development that will be hopeful to use some penny funding, and also it will produce mostly units for those at 80% and 120% of median income. This was the first development that we brought forward to council for approval of the Economic Stability Fund. We're very happy that this 415 unit beautiful marketplace development, market rate development is going to include 125 units for households at 80% and 120% of the area median income. At this point, I'd also like to emphasize the importance in our community of the State Housing Initiative Partnership Program, Affordable Housing Advisory Committee, and the incentive plan. And I'm going to use a little bit of the Florida Housing Coalition's terminology regarding the 4 buckets of incentives that we focused on as part of our work as an advisory committee. The financial incentives that need to be local, the zoning and land use incentives that need to be brought forward, land resources as an incentive, and the educational and strategic partnerships. Each of these areas has been brought forward as a team as we review these different financial incentives, working with Pinellas County for the Penny for Pinellas. County also established some of their county funding for a trust fund that they shared with the local governments, which was very beneficial to us in the past. And we are using some program income from that to help produce housing currently. We are looking forward, and the advisory committee has helped encourage the possible use of the American Rescue Plan funding for the affordable housing. They also have been able to work with the county to allow a reduction of the transportation or multimodal impact fees when the units have been designated as affordable and restricted as affordable. We're also understanding that there may be a potential for a full future waiver. We will be bringing and requesting that in the future. We made an attempt for the building department surplus fees, which was not allowed in 2021. We also have a sidewalk reimbursement program and some rebates for rehab within the Southside CRA. The option D special assessment fee waiver is available when there's a lot that was vacant in the city, had special assessments, and we allow them to request a waiver of those fees if they're producing a single family unit on the property, a new one. The zoning and land use incentives may be part of the reason that I'm speaking to you today. Our planning director has been a wonderful partner in the incentive plan process and the work that they have done with the housing department to help bring forward zoning and land use change incentives has been extremely helpful. Reducing parking, the 20-unit Boley development that you saw normally would have had to have had a parking structure involved. However, they allowed for reduced parking and that property was allowed to move forward without having to do the parking structure. And the House Bill 1339 implementation that Whit mentioned, we've had several committee meetings on that. We're hopeful to bring something forward in August. We're still working a bit on some of the criteria, but it is a balancing act, and we're hopeful to balance the concerns of the overall county for not losing employment opportunities with the need to bring housing close to the transportation and employment centers. The planning department's 2050 plan, they'll be implementing soon. The plan changes to help us bring this missing middle concept forward. And the workforce housing payment in lieu program, we're hopeful to bring forward this year a revised calculation. The accessory dwelling units piece of our zoning and land use incentives, just a small change from the zoning department to reduce the minimum lot size to 4,500 instead of the previous, I believe it was 5,200 square feet, increase the potential number of lots which would qualify for having an accessory dwelling unit from 22,000 to 32,000. So that opens up the possibility for many additional parcels to add granny flats or garage apartments, the accessory units. The land resources as an incentive, the city is working on a lot disposition program for any properties brought in through foreclosure or lands available for taxes. Those are designated for future affordable housing, and any eligible single family lot goes directly into a program that helps produce a house for a household at or below 120% of median income. And again, I'd like to focus on the importance of the strategic partnerships that we would have, that we are having as part of the implementation of this program. City Council has been on board from the beginning, and they've really been working with making sure that we have good partners with our Affordable Housing Advisory Committee. Our builders, both for-profit and nonprofit, are all focused on the need for the production of affordable and workforce units. And we have many other advocates in the community, the Foundation for Healthy St. Pete, and a new business initiative with the chamber, which is Yes in My Backyard. Also we have Faith and Action, Stronger Together, I believe is the FAST acronym. And they are very supportive in our production of affordable housing units. And with that, I'd like to thank you for allowing me to share a little bit, and look forward to working with you and going through some of your questions as we go further along.
Great. Thank you, Stephanie, for that presentation. It's encouraging to hear about from a local government that has developed an affordable housing plan and put it into action. We'll join you again during the question and answer session after our next speaker. Our final panelist today is Scott Culp. Scott is a principal of Atlantic Housing Partners and has over 35 years of development and construction experience. As someone that has been directly responsible for the development and construction of over 25,000 residential units, Scott is going to share some affordable housing development success stories with us today. Thank you for joining us and sharing your experiences, Scott.
Thank you. I hope that you guys can hear me okay. I'm unfortunately having to do this on my phone. Not really good at all the technology. We have been, Atlantic Housing Partners has been developing affordable housing for about since the tax credit program began. And I'd like to say that most of our experience has just come from our mistakes. And I think we've made all the mistakes and hopefully have learned from them and try to produce what we can for affordable housing as we move forward. Today, I want to just try and give you a little bit of a summary of a few of the developments that we've been involved with. You're seeing those, on your screen now. The three that we're going to talk about today. The first one being the Amelia Court Creative Village in the city of Orlando in Orange County. And then after that, we'll talk about Central Landings, the city of Palm Coast and Flagler County. And then lastly, being hosted here by Volusia County, Clyde Morris Landing's a success story right there in Volusia County in the city of Daytona Beach. So first, moving to Amelia Court Creative Village. This, of course, is in downtown city of Orlando. I think if you, I'm sorry, I see our slides are a little bit different formatted. So we'll go to Central Landings first. And I apologize for that. We're having to do this at separate locations with the slides moving from a separate location than I'm talking from. The Central Landings is in the city of Palm Coast and Flagler County. I'm sure a lot of people that are listening to the webinar are familiar with Palm Coast, a DRI that was developed back in 2004, fairly extensive DRI. And we developed in 2019, it was 2020, the Central Landings at Palm Coast. Central Landings is 233 units of affordable housing within the city of Palm Coast. That community has a total development cost of just over $41 million. And that one is 100% affordable. There's a lot of mixed use development and mixed income development in the overall DRI. So we were comfortable with this particular community within the DRI being 100% affordable. The keys to the development viability in this particular location, the multifamily mortgage revenue bonds are essentially the first mortgage debt. Those were issued by the Volusia County Housing Finance Authority. Flagler doesn't have their own housing finance authority. So we were able to use the Volusia County Housing Finance Authority to issue those bonds. And as most of you already know, those bonds are just low interest debt. But what comes with that, the next item, is the 4% low income housing tax credits, non-competitive as of right tax credits. And those are create the tax credit equity, which are integral to this. So really the multifamily mortgage revenue bonds represent low interest debt, but the important part of utilizing that is to obtain the 4% low income housing tax credits, which are the equity to make it close to feasible. You still have a gap. In this particular location, the city of Palm Coast, the next key to the development viability, provided for a local incentive. The city's partnership with us created another $5,000 a unit in a rebate directly to the developer to reduce our costs. So that financial support was helpful and beneficial in, one, helping to fill the gap, but also helping us to recognize the city was a partner with us, and they really were interested in affordable housing and wanted to see it continue. So that was integral to the success of Central Landings. We would not have been able to develop that without the city's financial support. I think moving on in your slides, we're going to Clyde Morris Landings. Clyde Morris Landings is actually still under construction. We've already delivered about 100 units there. It's going to be a total of 392 units in the first phase, and with a total development cost in that first phase of the affordable units, and the affordable community in that first phase, family affordable, is 216 units. That 216 unit development, just that portion, the 216 unit development, has a total development cost of a little over $41 million. And the keys to the development viability in that community, again, the first item in that development that is important to starting off the development viability is the multifamily mortgage revenue bonds, that first mortgage debt. Again, those come with, as of right, the 4% low-income housing tax credits, which are the equity that helps to make the community viable. But there's still a gap. There's still a gap in the funding between that first mortgage and the 4% tax credits. And in this case, we really had two items in there. The city had approved mixed income multifamily density for this site, and the city and the county both provided annual financial support. And I want to go over that just a little bit. This overall site was an industrial site. The city wanted to see mixed income and affordable housing built in this location. They approved density in this location for a total of 790 residential units. We're actually building it out at approximately 770 residential units, as you'll see at the top of this slide. But the value created, the city, that's the city's currency, their ability to provide that value of those additional units overall in the density of this is what provided some of the gap and some of the value to us to be able to develop this with the multifamily mortgage revenue bonds and the non-competitive resources of the 4% tax credits. Of course, there was still a gap there during the development period, and we worked over the 2-year period during the design and construction with both the city and the county on annual financial support. And what that really does is help us reduce our operating expenses. Both the city and the county, through different resources, stepped up to partner with us and provide $60,000 a year from each, from the city and from the county, in order to maintain the affordability of those 216 family affordable units. And that to us showed they were partners with us in providing affordable housing. They were serious about the need for affordable housing, and we were willing to proceed in the construction of that affordable housing because we were in the process with them on this annual contribution. I think that's a real key here, to see that both the city and the county had a commitment and a desire to work with us. We proceeded through the construction. Like I said, we're almost complete with construction, although the city and county's annual financial support was only approved within the last several weeks. But their commitment to that and their commitment to affordable housing really encouraged us to proceed. And we had a real combination here and a real partnership here between additional density created, value created for us, and additional resources created to reduce the operating expenses. And I will say that that's an important thing to consider for local governments. When you're reducing operating expenses, you're providing annual grants for that. You're getting dollar for dollar what you put out. When you provide money on the front end to reduce our cost, we actually have a reduction in our tax credits as well, because the tax credits are based upon our cost. So a local government's funds are actually more beneficial on an annual basis to reduce operating expenses. And we may come back to that if we have some time. We'll go to the next community in the city of Orlando, which was Amelia Court at Creative Village. Oh, I'm sorry, we forgot we had one other slide here I wanted to go over with you. We've all talked and seen a lot about what happens with the construction cost. And in Clyde Morris, we were right in the middle, construction was right in the middle of the pandemic. And we work on balancing our cost and our sources. And you see on this slide that we have the cost equal to what it costs to build the total development. And it's sourced by the debt, the multifamily mortgage revenue bonds, which represent at the front end about 45% of the cost. And then the sale of those 4% tax credits you see above that in the yellow arrow. And then our own gap financing that we provide to make that 4% deal work. Unfortunately, as we all are aware, during the pandemic and during the last few months that we were under construction, you'll see that as this slide progresses, cost went up significantly. As costs go up, we lose the opportunity to raise any of the debt, because the debt is restricted by our rents. So you'll see as we move through this, as the cost have increased, the debt didn't increase. The debt is controlled by the rent, the loan to value, and debt service coverage ratios. So we don't have the ability to increase that. Fortunately, you'll see that the tax credits did increase because they're a percentage of cost. And of course, we had that gap financing, which now at this point is no longer sufficient to fill the gap. I just wanted to point that out so you recognize the sources and uses in one of these developments and the risk that owners and developers take on, particularly as we've seen in these last 6 to 12 months with regard to construction pricing and overall cost. But again, that annual operating expense subsidy that we're getting from the city and the county is going to help to offset that in the long term. We'll proceed on to Amelia Court at Creative Village. I think that's the next slide we have here. If you're all, probably most of you are familiar with Amelia Court, with Creative Village. Creative Village was the old Amway Arena site. And Creative Village is the redevelopment, the planned development that was approved by the city of Orlando for the redevelopment of the old Amway site. And the important factor there in Creative Village was that the city in their PD, in their requirement, was adamant about the need for affordable housing. And they were adamant about in this redevelopment, that this redevelopment of Amway Center downtown had to include affordable housing. They didn't have to do that. This is very valuable property, the property that they could have sold for all kind of, market rate housing and other development. And they've actually done very well bringing in UCF downtown for their downtown campus and EA Sports. And so there's a lot going on in Creative Village. We like the opportunity here to be a mixed income community in a mixed use redevelopment. So this community has, market rate, student housing, UCF housing, the UCF downtown campus, Valencia, EA Sports, a lot of office buildings that are going to continue to be developed there. But the redevelopment of Amelia Court at Creative Village is something that we're proud to be involved in. And I think is a strong model because what you see here is true mixed income, true mixed use. In Amelia Court at Creative Village, we have 256 units that are already developed and complete. 177 of those are affordable at a cost of $56 million. You can see the cost is very high in a downtown urban setting. And those are the places that it's most important that we utilize the most competitive resources, as you see here, the 9% low-income housing tax credits. Those tax credits are integral to this urban style of development where the costs are so high. You really can't make these financially feasible with multifamily mortgage revenue bonds and 4% credits. So here we had the 9% tax credits, which were supported by the city as a local government preference for Amelia Court at Creative Village. City waived the majority of the impact and connection fees for this community, and the city also provided financial support. actually $625,000 of financial support to facilitate the application to Florida Housing Finance Corporation. But I go back to, and you'll see in large bold there, the city's PD requirement for affordable housing. That's really the key here, because if the city had just provided a bonus incentive, a bonus density incentive, there's plenty of market rate developers that could have come in and paid more for the land and said, we don't need the incentive. We'll take what you have there and we'll develop it. Or if the city was only looking at the highest and best use, the best dollar return they could get for their land, obviously market rate developers could pay more. But local government stepped in and said, it's important to us that we have mixed income and that we have mixed use in this community, and we're requiring a certain amount of affordability within Creative Village. So that was an integral key to having the ability to develop downtown in an urban area, a high quality, affordable housing community. I think my next slide is probably the final one here, with our final thoughts to consider. And from our perspective, what we like to try and discuss with the local governments is considering affordable housing as infrastructure. Just like we look at roads, water, sewer, those things are important to our communities, and they're important that we have strong infrastructure in place. Affordable housing is critical to major employers that want to relocate to a local area, and affordable housing in proximity to the jobs for the workforce reduces the transportation burden on the community, and it also reduces the transportation cost on the family. Also, we like to talk about affordable housing as being transformational. It's transformational with regard to the generational family that is involved in and benefiting from the affordable housing. They get opportunity because they're not having to be over cost burden paying for their rent. They have opportunities to improve their education. They have opportunities to improve their healthcare, opportunities to improve their nutrition, because they're not overly cost burdened with rent, because we've been able to provide affordable housing. And therefore, that family transitions, it transforms out of that poverty and out of that place of being unable to have the resources for those other items, and they transform their family life generationally. So you see those kids moving on beyond that low-income poverty section and moving into the society in a very productive manner. I think I've said way too much, and I apologize that we weren't able to do this, in a more smooth fashion with the slides moving with the discussion. I had some technical difficulties here, but I'll be available for questions.
Thank you, Scott, for providing that information and sharing what affordable housing can look like from a developer's perspective. We're now going to welcome back all of the panelists. We have the opportunity to present questions to them that have been submitted by the audience. Okay, first, Scott, we have a question from the audience. When the current eviction moratorium expires, do you anticipate a landslide of previously stalled evictions to move forward? And how do you think that will impact affordable rental housing?
In Florida, well, and I'd probably say across the nation, but our experience is primarily in Florida at this point, there's really no reason for residents of affordable housing communities to be evicted when this eviction moratorium expires. And the reason I say that is we've been fortunate to have an incredible amount of resources provided from the federal government, through the state, and through the local governments for rental assistance. So we've been very fortunate as landlords and owners, and our residents have been very fortunate as the ones that have really been impacted most by the pandemic and the issues surrounding the pandemic. We've been fortunate the federal government has stepped up and provided that rental assistance. We know that in the beginning, there were difficulties in getting those programs up and running because we had to move through a process, and Florida Housing developed a fantastic process initially to help residents. Just took some time to roll out. Then they moved into this next program now that I think was $800 million from the state for rental assistance, of which most of that is still available. And that's being handled through Our Florida, which is a program under Department of Children and Families. So from our perspective as a landlord of about 18,000 units in Florida, we don't believe there's going to be any kind of landslide of evictions. We believe our residents have been very well supported by our federal and local governments, and they have opportunities. And yes, you'll hear some media stories that might sound negative, but you really need to look behind all those facts, because the people that are demonstrating, their willingness to come forward and work with the governments and work with their landlords, they're going to be provided the rental assistance. They are being provided the rental assistance. I can tell you from our perspective, we'll have less than 1% of our units that will have any issues with regard to evictions. There's always going to be difficulties. There's always going to be those stories that, not everything worked out just the way we would like for it to, and people didn't, participate in the way they should. But as a general rule, an answer to that question, we should not, Florida in particular, and that's where our experience is, be concerned about the difficulty, because the resources are there and the resources are flowing to our residents.
Great, thanks, Scott. Well, we have a question from the audience. Who exactly is in need of affordable housing? Is there anyone specific that you've noticed in your community that others might not think about, such as manufacturing or hospitality workers?
I think for us in Pinellas County, it's a pretty broad array of people. I would say the focus originally was probably on more of the hospitality related workers. They don't tend to live in the communities where they work. So that's one of the challenges because of the price of housing. And so getting transportation connections, again, is part of that strategy. But as we got more into it and dug into it, I've had major employers come to me saying that we cannot recruit white collar workers, engineers into the Pinellas County because of the cost and the transportation issues getting in and out of the county. And I think it's really equally our workforce population of people who are teachers, firefighters, police officers, that population. We have a slightly older population. And for us, we want to make sure that we have people who go off to college, who are graduating from high school, who see their future in Pinellas County and they need places to live here. And so the focus really has shifted from the traditional focus on affordable housing to maybe a broader definition of younger people and the next generation of workers in all of our industries in Pinellas County.
Great, thank you. Stephanie, we have a question from the audience. What is the missing middle all about, and how does it help affordability?
Well, as Whit mentioned, the county produced an entire series about missing middle, so I'll try to capsulize it just a little bit, but it's a term used to describe multi-unit, low-rise housing, triplexes, quadplexes, courtyard apartments, bungalow courts. And the idea is that the lower rise housing would be comparable and more compatible to scale to single family homes. We've also discovered that traditionally in St. Petersburg, there has been missing middle throughout our historic neighborhoods, and people don't even realize the density that's in some of those lower scale apartment buildings. So we are looking forward to taking our first steps in bringing that back. We feel like it works very well with walkable communities, being able to be close to transit, and it blends well as a transition between the single family areas and our business areas. So we're looking forward to seeing a lot more of the missing middle coming forward shortly, and our planning department is right on board with that. They've already, I believe, made the text amendments that are required in our land development regulations, and as part of our 2050 planning effort that's moving forward now, they're working on the actual map amendments of which areas of the cities are most appropriate for the first phase of our missing middle.
I'd like to just add briefly that missing middle housing is really part of a zoning strategy. If you think about zoning as really segregating land uses, and we have done a really good job of establishing single-family residential neighborhoods, and there's a lot of protection and desire to keep those single-family neighborhoods. Enabling missing middle housing gives you the ability to adjust your zoning so that people can live adjacent or proximate to those kinds of developments. And again, the compatibility and character makes them less of a threat, perhaps, to undermining that stability of single-family zoning. So it's not a holistic strategy. You can't hang your hat on it for everything, but it's part of the solution. And it gives our diverse communities the ability to kind of figure out which solutions are best suited for their communities.
Sounds like just another tool in the toolbox, which is one of the things that we're really looking for here in Volusia County. So we have a couple of questions here for both Whit and Scott related to what local governments can do. I'll start with you, Whit. How can cooperation between local governments or with private sector help amplify your local efforts and facilitate success?
Well, I was interested in hearing Scott's perspective, because I think we need to learn more from the development community of where the best bang for the buck can happen. But I think that, we can work across scales, and some things are going to be more effective than others. But for us, as a redeveloping county, we need to make sure we can set the regulatory table so that we get the right outcomes that we want. And we are going to be forming a developers roundtable that will give us feedback on this process as I go through our investment corridor approach. But I see local governments really breaking down the barriers of hostility or adversity to changing what's in place already. That aversion to change is probably the biggest thing that local governments can do, because if you put that on the development community, I don't think you're going to get much. So clearing the brush and setting the policy framework is probably the most important thing we can do. Second to that, as I mentioned, is regulatory reform, and that is revisiting your land development code regulations, which historically have been set up in a way that were pretty hostile to some of the concepts of mixed use and non-auto redevelopment that we've been talking about, or less auto-centric is probably the best way to say it, so that we reduce the amount of parking that's available for every particular type of unit. And again, what a lot of our neighborhoods and local government elected officials think about is you're going to create traffic chaos or no place for anybody to park. So we have to have some ready answers for that, which is investing in transit, which is making places more walkable, and building the infrastructure and funding the operations that enable that. So that's not going to solve the problem, but I think that's part of the deal that we can work with the private sector on.
Great. And Scott, from the developer's perspective, what can a local government do to be most effective in increasing the supply of affordable housing?
Thanks for the question. And I want to first make a comment with regard to what Whit commented on with regard to traffic and parking. Amelia Court at Creative Village was a good example of that, where we worked together with the city and looked at traffic studies across the country, and where you're in proximity to mass transit and you've developed mass transit and you want to encourage people to utilize that quality mass transit, you need to be reducing your parking ratios and encouraging people to utilize the mass transit. So the more you require or encourage greater parking ratios, the less you're requiring or encouraging the mass transit that you've spent, so many resources trying to develop. So just a comment, in agreement with Whit on that. With regard to the most efficient uses for local government, obviously leveraging their resources with the federal resources, because the federal resources are the most rich. The federal low-income housing tax credits, primarily, whether it be the 4% credits or the 9% credits. When you leverage the local government resources, which are much smaller than that, with those, that's most important. You're going to get the most bang for your buck. Secondly, looking at what I mentioned briefly in the slideshow of the local government's currency is their entitlements. If somebody wants more density, if they want more intensity, whether it be office square footage or residential units, we need to be asking those groups that are asking the local government for those entitlements, what are you going to do for the affordable housing that gets created through that increased density and increased intensity? And I think that's very important for local governments to really consider that value that they're adding to those developers when they provide those entitlements. That's value they're giving to them that they're not entitled to. I'm a very big property rights advocate, and I don't believe you need to be asking people that already have entitlements in place to be, paying for the affordable housing. But when you're giving them additional entitlements that provides additional value to them, you need to be asking them, how are they going to participate in developing your infrastructure, which affordable housing is infrastructure, just like roads and water and sewer. And then lastly, as I mentioned in the slideshow, what the city of Daytona Beach and the county have done with a 15-year annual contribution towards those operating expenses, those things count more if you're looking at tax credit communities than the upfront contributions. And that may seem contrary to logic, but it has to do with the calculation of tax credit equity. So I would say focus on putting in, annual dollars so you can see that projects are being maintained well and that the affordability is being provided in the mechanism that was presented to you, and you're getting dollar for dollar what you're contributing at that point. So those three things I think are probably what we would focus on. The land being the biggest thing. If you don't require people to address affordability, they should and will sell it to the highest price bidder.
Great, thanks, Scott. Stephanie, we have a question from the audience. You talked about the 4 buckets of incentives. Is there one bucket that's more important than the other?
Not really. I think that the partnerships that we've had have been really important, ensuring the zoning changes. And during our discussions, I said that having a local dedicated funding source was very, very important. So there's really not one that's more important. It's very I think you need to take a little bit from each of the buckets, and I'm aware that we can work together to make sure that we've got those important partnerships to produce those affordable housing. I really want to thank Scott in his previous comment, because I'm always learning from these. The idea of having more of an annual contribution later instead of upfront is something that I hadn't really thought of before. And so that's really appreciative in talking about the idea of moving forward and not just the upfront development.
Great. Another question now for Scott. We have a question from the audience again. In a tax credit funded community, does a resident's rent increase when their income increases?
That's a good question. And oftentimes people perceive, maybe from some area they came from the Northeast, that these residents, when they improve their job, their income, that their rent is going to go up. But in tax credit communities, and I think it was part of the genius of the tax credit legislation that was created back in 1985 federally, when you qualify to move into that community, if you improve your income, if you improve in your job, your rent doesn't go up. You can stay there. There's no, at the end of your 1-year lease, you don't have to leave. You can continue that affordable rent. And that's very positive for those residents, because they're then able to take the additional income that they're earning and apply that, like I said earlier, to be it education, healthcare, nutrition, places that really need to be served. So I think it's a positive part of the program that we see. Part of the transformation in tax credit communities is in people's lives as they have the additional income that they need to support their families.
Okay, now we're at our last question. So Whit, to you, what does success in affordable housing look like in 5 to 10 years?
I think for us, it is meeting our production targets for affordable housing. We're going to be tracking that. So that 10,000 number of units that I mentioned is something we're going to be looking at. I would also say in 5 years, for instance, is having the funding in place, the commitment of funding to really develop our public transportation network greater than it is. The Pinellas Suncoast Transit Authority is, compared to its peers, is a very poorly funded transit system. And I think a lot of folks around Florida can relate to that with their public transit systems. We have not passed any sort of discretionary funding source for transit. They do have a property tax funding source, so that at least they do have a dedicated funding source, but it's capped by the legislature and they are at their cap. So we really cannot increase the frequency and availability of service. And so to me, that's going to be a key to the whole thing coming together. So the Board of County Commissioners is considering putting a referendum on the ballot in 2022 or 2024. And we will see how that process develops. So to me, housing and transportation are linked, and we've got to hit the production goals, but we've got to do it in the right places, and we've got to provide other forms of infrastructure that can support that.
Great, thank you, Whit. That's all the time we have for questions today. I want to express appreciation to our colleagues and stakeholders who have joined us today and during the previous webinars. I believe that we have all gained insight and knowledge that we will use moving forward. Whit, Stephanie, and Scott, once again, we are grateful to you for taking the time to talk with us and share your knowledge and expertise. Staff will review those relevant questions that were not answered live and provide written responses that will be posted on the initiative's website. With this, we have completed our webinar series. In August, the initiative moves forward with an affordable housing summit. The summit is being held at the Ocean Center in Daytona Beach from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. on August 27th. Various guest speakers and panelists will discuss affordable housing topics, and attendees will participate in breakout groups during the summit. Registration is now open on Eventbrite, or you can visit our website, www.volusia.org, for a link to the registration page. Following the summit, focused work groups will establish a county-wide plan to address affordable housing. Please visit our website for more information. Thank you for joining us today. Please let others know about this opportunity and have a great weekend. We look forward to seeing you at the summit.